Okay, so this is a vlog for one of my evaluation questions. The question in which I'm going to be doing is, in what ways does your media product use, develop or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? So in this post I'll be talking about different aspects. I've got titles, camera, mise-en-scene, sound, things like that, and I'm going to be talking about them and how I've used certain things to conform, challenge or develop the genre of horror which I've used. Okay, so the first section I will be covering in this vlog is titles. They both adhere and challenge the horror genre. So the first way in which they adhere and conform to a genre is I've got the production company logo introduction, you'd call it, at the beginning, and obviously that'll be popping up on the screen now. The reason I've done this, and the reason that other films do this, is to showcase the production company. It links the company to the film, as you would have on films produced by Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers at the beginning, so people know who produced it. So it's a very important aspect of the film, and it's also why I put it at the beginning. And the next way in which my titles conform is at the ending. My title was inspired from my research process, looking at short films on YouTube, Google, Vimeo is another website you can use. It's another website where people upload films which you can watch and review. You can, like I said, just look at them. And 9 out of 10 times, credits either roll from bottom to top on a black screen at the end to obviously say the name, say who was involved, producers, directors, camera, things like that, or they slowly work in through the film, they'll appear on screen. I chose to put mine at the end because I want my audience's full attention to the film. The reason it's a horror is because it's intriguing. It makes people get lured into it in order to make them jump. It's a very important aspect of it, and something which I made sure I conform to. This is also a point of how the titles challenged the conventions of horror, because a lot of the time you have either the title I found is at the beginning. I analysed 5 different horror films, and 3 of them had the title at the beginning as opposed to the end. So I've challenged the genre there because I wanted, like I said, my audience's full attention, so I put it at the end. It also creates people, they want to know what it is, so they keep watching till the end to find out the name of it. Okay, so another way in which I've challenged the conventions of horror is I haven't used a tagline. A lot of these horror films have taglines, so only safe in the light, stuff like that. My tagline on my poster is the only thing you can do is to hide and pray he doesn't find you. I haven't included this in the film because, again, it draws the audience's eyes away from what's happening in the film, and it doesn't look right on the credits at the end, so I've included it on my poster but not in my film. So it challenges the conventions, but I always find it's a more effective way for my particular film to not have it in. Okay, so the next section of this vlog is about my camera. Again, both challenging and conforming to the horror genre. It's almost a conventional and challenging at the beginning of my film. It's very slow starting footage, which you do find often in a lot of horror films, but I prolonged the slow start to draw the audience into a false sense of security. They think it's not going to be a horror film because you can't tell from the beginning. They think it's not going to be a horror film, they watch it, but it slowly changes, slowly uneases the mind, and it's a very effective way of creating tension, of causing jumps, which is one of the reasons that everybody likes watching the horror genre. So another way in which I'd say this develops the genre is how it's almost a classic feel. From the beginning all the way up to almost when she goes to bed, it's not clear what the genre is. By not having a clear genre, it causes enigma, it causes questions for the audience. All of this entices the audience to watch it. It's all hooks the audience, keeps them watching, and it's a very important factor to what I've done. Well, so this point also conforms to the conventions of horror film. I used different angles and different types of shots. So extreme close-up shots really shows the destruction, how would you put this, unease of the protagonist. Long shots, it establishes the area, creates almost, again, a false sense of security. It's high shots, viewing the protagonist in a higher light, making them seem bigger or smaller depending on high-low angles. All of these conform to how horror films build their tension. They draw you in, they create a connection with the protagonist, the main character. And when there's a disruption, so the creature arrives, then it hits the audience harder because they've already got that connection with the protagonist. Okay, so the next section in this vlog is about the mise-en-scene of this production, you'd say. It mostly adheres and conforms to the horror genre because I wanted it to be a blatant horror film, so by conforming to it, it almost blatantly points out what the film is. So an example, so there is slight challenges. The lighting is one of the main of these, so throughout the majority of it there is a low-key lighting. This creates a darker, more sinister tone to the film, creates tension, atmosphere. All of these things are very important to horror films. However, in the beginning of the film, I've juxtaposed this with high-key lighting. So it's a bright light when she's walking in from the car. It draws the audience into a false sense of security, again, not being clear on the genre of the film, almost makes them continue to watch it. So when it comes to the jumps and the scarier parts of the film, you'd say, it's a lot more effective because the audience have already been drawn in the initial stages. And the location I've used definitely does conform to the horror genre. It's in a suburban village, so the house links to the audience. It creates it more personal, it makes people think this could happen to me, it's in my home place. And if it happens to the protagonist, what's to say it can't happen to other people? It puts like seeds of fear almost in the audience's mind by linking the film and the creature and the scary parts of this film to somewhere where everyone is safest, in their own home. And this is very typical to horror films. So they've got connotation, you know, when you think of a home, it connotes safety, security. All of these are being corrupted, are being destroyed in this film by the protagonist being stalked by the creature. The way in which my mise-en-scene conforms is the clothing of the character. It's very similar to my last point. My protagonist, or the actor Ella, was wearing comfortable clothes. She was wearing jeans, a comfy jumper, you'd say, knitted woolen, very almost oversized to cause even more comfort, you'd say. It links to the audience. There's not horrendous, you know, extravagant makeup, extravagant costume, because it doesn't really link to the people watching it. Everybody wears jumpers, everybody wears jeans, the majority of people do, and it links to them. It makes the character more relatable to the audience. Again, when the building, and this again creates connection to the character. People watching it get drawn in and get a sense of almost emotions towards the protagonist, so that when she's being stalked and she's running and it's very tense times, then they almost feel empathy towards her because she comes across as someone, just another person our age, which is being affected. So again, it's a very important way to build tension, to create atmosphere in horror films. You need the audience to be drawn in and lured in to be able to scare them. If you can't draw them in, they won't pay attention and the scares won't work. It's as simple as that. So I've done all of these in my mise-en-scene in order to draw my audience in. Another section of the mise-en-scene is the colour palette. I've used apart from earlier on, which was very not colourful. I've taken the contrast out and desaturated it. It's darker, it's less colourful. All of these things are typical of horror films. There's no colour to connote passion. There's no feeling to the film through colour, which is why it's because there's no feeling to the film of colour. It's kind of changed to other parts of it. They feel it through what's happening, as opposed to the colours which are on the screen. It's a way which I've seen in a lot of films, such as the new Lights Out, which has been released in 2016 now, so not that new, but it's very clever. I liked the way that they framed it. It had a very low colour palette. It's not colourful at all, and because of this, it puts you on edge. It puts you guessing what's going to happen next, and it's something which I find is all very, again, important, a phrase I'll be saying a lot in this, to horror films. So the next section which I'll be talking about is the editing. So it both challenges and conforms to the genre, different ways, and I've done things specifically in order to create certain things, if that makes sense, which I'll be explained. So one of the ways I've broken and challenged the conventions is I've started it off with a very slow editing, very fluid transitional cuts, you'd say. So from where the protagonist is walking from the car to the door, it's one fluid tracking shot from the camera. And fluid shots, conventional shots, are not conventional. Genre are often short, quick edits. It builds tension, builds atmosphere, but I always think by changing that and by making it begin to be very fluid, it almost builds the tension naturally by itself. Instead of forcing the tension on people, it builds it naturally. It creates questions for the audience. So one of the ways in which I've conformed to the horror genre is with jump cuts. Very, like I said, fast, short edits and transitions really build the tension. They really cram it on the audience, which is, like I said, very conventional to horror film. It increases the speed of the film. So it increases the speed of the film. It makes people reach multiple scare climaxes, they're known as. When people think there's going to be a jump and a jump scare, in which there's not, the music fades away to keep the tension high and the audience guessing where the jump is going to be. It was one of the main factors I was trying to create making this film. I wanted to not be this typical scare in films. That my film challenges the conventions of horror films is I've used a couple of fade to blacks. It fades in and fades out from black. This is not typical of horror films because when building with tension, it's fast edits. We've already covered that. And by having these fade to blacks, it almost breaks it up and breaks the tension. But sometimes for horror films, breaking the tension lulls the audience into a false sense of security. It's, again, very well used in the film Lights Out, both short film by David Sandberg and the Warner Brothers production. It breaks the tension in order to all of a sudden cram it all on the audience in one loud burst and a jump. Very effective, and again, something which I have used to its full potential. So the next section in this vlog is about the sound which has been used, which I think is probably the most important section and important aspect of a horror film. If you don't have the sound, you can have the most amazing footage, and without the right sound, it won't work. The sound is the main way of building with tension, creating the eerie silence, which you get in many horror films. So one of the ways I've developed the convention is by using a range of volumes. Quite typically in horror films, it's loud, distorted music, disorientates the audience. but I've used a range of both loud and quiet at the same time, different times, depending on the scenario, and it creates just that extra layer of atmosphere in the film. And the more you can't have too many layers, but I feel I've got it just right. So the layers I've got in the film showcase the horror genre. They draw people in. And the good thing about drawing people in is they're even easier to scare, which is a very good point when it comes. Another thing I've done which almost develops the genre is I added non-diegetic screaming in it. We recorded this with Ella, and I've laid it on top of the jump scare. And the reason I put this not in the clip is because when you record with the camera, it's very easy to distort the sound with her movement. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep the screen as a screen, so by laying it with the sound as opposed to on the clip, her movement stays separate, and her screen, I can change the audio, I can change the levels with that to make it more effective. So at the end you'll notice when the creature, well, when she turns around, the creature's in front of her and there's a scream, that was recorded separately to the film, and it's a very good way of keeping those layers separate. So one of the ways in which I've conformed to the genre is I've intentionally distorted the sound at points. At the end, when the creature appears, in the middle, when there's the jump scare of the creature appearing in front of her, I've intentionally bumped the sound up to distort it. But distortion creates a sense, and it connotes a sense of unease, of disruption, and just the amounts of kind of almost terror in the film. Distorting it is a very common aspect of horror films. It's commonly done, and it's one of the reasons in which I've done it. I wanted it to disturb the audience. It's one of the points of a horror film. And the way in which it's done, I feel, again, like many other points, has best showcased the genre in which I've chosen to use. So the final point of the sound in my film is about how I kept the diegetic voice to a minimum. The most she says is hello when she's asking, well, not asking, she's calling to see if anybody is in her house. And the reason I've done this is because it removes a basic human right of being able to talk. By doing this, it degrades the character, it creates empathy for her, she's not allowed to speak. This also has stereotypical conventions in horror films of females not having a voice. Again, in all the old films, Scream, Psycho, women didn't have a voice in the film. They almost alienizes them by not being able to speak. And it's one of the traits in which I've adopted in my film to create an empathy and, again, a further connection with the protagonist. And almost creates her as a target of the creature. By not being able to speak, she's portrayed as a target. It's a very hard to describe thing I've done, but by doing it, one of the other reasons in which I've done this is voice sometimes indicates when jump scares are going to occur. In a lot of films, you hear people talking, and as soon as they stop talking, the audience straight away think there's going to be a jump scare. By keeping the talking to a minimum and not having a lot of it, there's always that thought. They're always trying to guess when the jump scare is going to be, because there's not that indicator from the voice of when the jump is going to occur in the film. And it again keeps the tension naturally high, as opposed to dropping it up and down constantly. It keeps it almost at a naturally high level, which is again important for horror films. So another way my poster conforms to the conventions is the protagonist on it. She is a female protagonist. It's very stereotypical of horror films to use a female protagonist, because women and females in horror films are very stereotyped. They're vulnerable, they're scared. Sometimes they come across as a Jezebel, so sometimes they're led by sexual desire. In this film, that's not the case. She is a female for the stereotypes of being vulnerable and linking more to the audience. It creates empathy, again, being female. So another thing which is conventional to the codes and conventions of horror is the image on, well, one of the images on my poster. It's the half face of the protagonist. It's an extreme close-up. It shows the fear in her eyes. It's very conventional for horror films to do this. So an example is on the poster for the brand new 2017 It, with the clown. It's the clown staring directly into the camera, showing the anger, the hatred in its eyes, and I've used this to show the fear in her eyes. By doing this, again, it creates enigma. It makes the audience want to see why she's looking like this, and again, draws people to watch my film. Opposed to challenges, it's arguably challenges, the codes conventions, is the colour scheme, not the colour scheme. So a way that my poster challenges and conforms to the genre of horror is the lighting. It's a relatively high-key lighting. I know it's still black and white, which isn't relatively high-key, but it's brighter than a lot of the films, like I was saying about It. It's a very dark poster, withholds information. Having the high-key lighting, it's again a false sense of security for the audience. If you build up a lot of layers of the false security, they get lulled into thinking it's not a horror film, and by doing this, the jumps are so much more effective. But in the poster terms, on the poster terms, it makes it a lot better and drawing in for the audience to be able to see the protagonist as opposed to not see her. Having half her face cut off withholds that information. It creates the question, what's the rest of her face? Does it look normal? Is it distorted? Is it, I've seen films where the other half is scarred and disfigured. It creates almost the need and the drive to go and see the film, which is all important. So another way in which I've conformed is the billing board is in a stereotypical thin font, sans serif font usually, and it creates consistency. It draws the line of a poster. 9 out of 10 posters have a billing board. It's very important, and by doing this, it makes the poster more effective. It draws it out as a poster as opposed to a leaflet. So the final section of this vlog is about my magazine, and the majority of it does conform to the conventions of both horror films and magazine articles. So the main masthead, the main headline as you would call it, the feature headline, is in big bold writing. It stands out, it draws the eye to it. It creates a need to read what's underneath due to the size of it. Again, something else which conforms is the image takes up the majority of the page. It takes up over half of the page. The reason I've done this is because in my magazine I showcased Ella, the actress, as it's her debut film. It's her first proper film, and by having the large picture of her, it's just blatant. It shows you who it is about. So something else I've done in my magazine is I've referenced the main actor, Ella Walton, director, producer. A lot, well, when I say a lot, I mean all magazine reviews include the director and producer of the film. It can be someone very recognisable like Tim Burton or Quentin Tarantino. All of these things. So another thing I've done which confirm. So another thing I've done which conforms to both the horror and the magazine article conventions is I've referenced not only the actor, or actress you'd say, but also the director and producer. All magazine reviews have the producer and director of the film. It could be someone famous and relatable like Tim Burton, or it couldn't. It could be someone that no one's heard of before. By having these names in, it creates links with the audience. If they've seen a film by them before, it plays on the customer loyalty. It plays on the need to see a film purely down to a director. And in case of smaller directors, it puts their name out there. It shows the world and people who read these magazines that they are what they do. It shows what they create and which films they've created, and it helps to just, well, like I said, put their name out there. Okay, so I know that was a very long video. That was the question 1 of my evaluation, and again we balanced all of these different conforming, challenging, developing on all these different sections to best show my film. So again, this was done in this vlog, and I will see you in the next.